At least 30 people are dead in the wake of two horrific mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, and in Dayton, Ohio. The alleged gunman in the El Paso shooting was reportedly motivated by hate. Police say he admitted to casing the Walmart with the goal of killing as many Mexicans as he could.
During a national address, President Trump condemned racism, hatred, and white supremacy. He also called for reforms, bipartisanship, and the death penalty for people who commit mass murders.
In the 2 decades since Columbine, our nation has watched with rising horror and dread as one mass shooting has followed another, over and over again, decade after decade. We cannot allow ourselves to feel powerless. We can and will stop this evil contagion.
Joining us now via Skype to give us his perspective is Arno Michaelis. He was once a leader in a racist skinhead organization, and he now works to counter terrorism and extremism. He's also the co-author of The Gift of Our Wounds, a Sikh and a former white supremacist find forgiveness after hate. Arno, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Sagar, Crystal, it's an honor. Thank you.
Absolutely. Arno, I mean, you have a unique perspective here. Obviously, this hate has now come to El Paso. What can the government do about it? This is something that you spend a lot of time thinking about.
I think what's really important for the government to do, first of all, is to stop espousing rhetoric that strikes chords with people who are afraid of immigrants. Mm-hmm. It's a really bad policy to use fear to motivate people to try to get policy passed. I don't think we want to be a society that's driven by fear. And when there's constant talk of our country being invaded, and even the word infested has been used, those are word for word what were in the manifesto of this El Paso shooter. So there has to be some responsibility in that regard. And beyond that, the obvious thing is we have to start taking firearms seriously in this country, because we don't as it is. We need some federal laws that stop people who are unbalanced from obtaining assault rifles.
Yeah.
Arno, I think what a lot of us just struggle to understand is what gets you to this place of hatred and such a horrible ideology to start with. You obviously have a sort of firsthand view of that. Help us understand the roots of this horrific ugliness.
The roots are really, it's simply suffering. It boils down to hurt people. And it's very important to understand that that's never an excuse to hurt anybody, much less murder 22 people at a Walmart or murder 9 people on the streets of Dayton, Ohio, and you could just go down the list. But it is the reason why people become so miserable, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So you're hurting, you kind of withdraw, you isolate yourself, and you're hurting because you're not connected to the world around you, and you become further disconnected, so you hurt more, and the cycle starts to snowball. And if you add to the mix toxic ideology like white nationalism, or religious extremism or political extremism, what have you, that can lead to these types of massacres happening.
Mm-hmm. Arno, one of the things I know you think a lot about is about the role that the internet plays in all of this. Now, there's been discussion about taking 8chan off the internet. That's where some of these shootings and people who believe this stuff have been gathering. Do you think that they should be taken offline? And how should tech companies and social media platforms deal with white nationalists?
I think there has to be a threshold where things are taken down, and that's been the case with the so-called Islamic State. If you post a YouTube video calling for a caliphate and attacks on the West, it'll be taken down toot sweet. Whereas there's a lot more leeway with white nationalist rhetoric, and a lot of that has to do with the First Amendment, and rightfully so. I'm a huge proponent of the First Amendment. It's probably the best thing about our Constitution, but at the same time, we have to be wary when this free speech actually becomes planning of terror. And I think that threshold has certainly been reached. White nationalism is an international threat, as the El Paso shooter was inspired by the Christchurch shooter, who was inspired by the Norway shooter. There's very plain international connections that drive this kind of violence. So we need to start approaching white nationalism the same way we approach ISIS, Al Qaeda, Al Shabaab, et al., and come down on them just as hard. And the tech companies are working to do that. I've done a lot of work with Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And I know that all three of those companies have dedicated a ton of time and energy and resources to combat white nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
Arno, what was the spark that got your thinking to start to change? What do you say to these guys?
What I say to people who are involved in any kind of hate group is just that you don't know how great life can be when you're not terrified of the rest of the human beings on the planet. And I challenge them and basically say, like, look, I've lived your life for 7 years. There's nothing you can tell me about it that I don't know. They haven't lived my life. I go everywhere that these guys are terrified to go, and I do it with joy, and I do it with gratitude, and I find family everywhere I go. So it's once you really like see the beauty of humanity and how awesome diversity is, and really what an asset it is to our society and to progress. It's something that I have never seen anybody turn back.
Where did that realization, though, for you come from?
For me, there's all sorts of factors involved in my turnaround. One was my parents' refusal to give up on me, which is really important, but also it was people who I claimed to hate who treated me with kindness and really drove home how wrong I was. It was people like a Jewish boss, a lesbian supervisor, Black and Latino coworkers who refused to capitulate to my hostility and reflect it, which is what I was trying to provoke. And instead, they demonstrated for me how human beings should treat each other, and that's what led to my turnaround, and I'm grateful for that every single day.
God, that's incredible.
Arno, if there are parents who are watching this, there are parents who are dealing with children who are on these online forums getting radicalized, what's your advice to them? How should they best deal with a child who becomes enamored by this? We should remember the shooter's only 21 years old. He's a product of the raucous internet. How do you deal with that as a parent?
It's a terrifying thing for parents to go through, and a lot of the harm that I've done, which is kind of hard to measure, but much of it was to my parents, and I literally put them through hell. So it's super difficult for parents who are dealing with this. But the first thing is to just again never give up on that child, and as much as they're trying to disconnect, you have to let them know that you're there and that you're not going to stop loving them no matter what, and that they'll always have a place to go. The worst thing you can do is to turn your back on them. And the next thing for parents to do is to reach out for help and find out what community resources there are. Talk to law enforcement, talk to social workers, talk to mental health professionals. I work with an organization called Parents for Peace. You can reach it at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. And it's essentially a network of parents who have lost children to violent extremism, as well as former violent extremists like myself and survivors of violent extremism like Pardeep Kalika, who lost his father in the Sikh temple shooting 7 years ago yesterday. And together we want to help parents reach children who are at risk and also directly work with the individuals themselves who are involved in violent extremist groups and offer help and a way forward.
And Arno, why do you think it is young men who are particularly disproportionately drawn to this ideology?
There's absolutely a gendered aspect to this. And that's across the board. It's not just white nationalism, but if you look at Islamism or political extremism, you'll see varying ratios, but the ratios are always pretty slanted in favor of men. And what I think it is personally, I think it's boils down to testosterone mismanagement. It's not understanding what healthy masculinity looks like and being afraid to face your feelings and your vulnerabilities. Men all over the world in every single culture are taught that it's not okay to cry. It's not okay to ask for help. It's not okay to say that you're afraid or that you're you're worried nobody's going to love you, or that you're not going to be successful, or that you're not strong enough. Like that's all that is frowned upon, and it has been for a very, very long time. And what we need to do is make the point that actually there's nothing more brave than admitting your vulnerabilities, and taking it even a step further to like open them up to show the world and be like, hey, this is all the things that hurt me. This is what I'm afraid of. That takes far more strength than pounding your chest and pretending that nothing hurts you. And I think the more we can get that message across to young men, the more of an outlet they're going to have for the pain they're going through, and the greater the likelihood they'll find a healthy way to process that pain.
So true and so well put. Arno, thank you so much.
Thank you, Arno. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Next on Rising, the U.S. declared China a currency manipulator after Beijing devalued their legal tender, the yuan.
The CEO of DC International Advisory, Steve Yates, is going to explain what this latest development means for the U.S.-China trade war. There's a lot there when Rising returns.